by MAHE in collaboration with the Association of European Studies in India, a pan-Indian organization dedicated to promoting European studies in India, and the UNESCO University Chair. To take us through the inaugural session of the conference, which will present global, regional, national, and institutional perspectives on cross-border education, may I invite the convener of the conference and also the moderator of the inaugural session, Professor Neeta Inamdar. Let me quickly introduce her to all our virtual guests. Professor Neeta dons multiple caps. She has been heading the Manipal Center for European Studies since its inception in 2009 and taken it to build it forward as India's first Jean Monnet Center of Excellence in 2018. She's also credited with numerous EU grants on topics ranging from internationalization of higher education to content and language integrated learning. Professor Neeta has also been awarded the prestigious Jean Monnet Module and Jean Monnet Chair in Economic Integration and European Identity. She has also served as a member of Advisory Committee to STIP 2020 by the Government of India. In addition to a very rich academic profile, Professor Neeta also takes pride as a publisher, since she's also the Chief Editor of Manipal Universal Press. With this introduction, let me invite Professor Neeta to take the proceedings ahead. Over to you, Neeta.
Thank you so much, Priya. A warm hello and greetings of the day to all the speakers and the participants of this India-EU Higher Education Meet. As speakers and registered participants are all from different parts of the world and in different time zones, I think a warm hello is the only option I have to replace a good morning, an afternoon, or an evening. To provide context to this conference, I must recall our journey into international higher education at Manipal Center for European Studies, which started with a Jean Monnet project in Bologna process and internationalization of Indian universities, awarded to us in 2016. This project concluded with the first Manipal Higher Education Meet organized in July 2018 that had very interesting contributions leading to the publication of the edited volume, Internationalization of Higher Education, the Dynamics of Education Ecology in 2019. In 2018, just as we concluded the Jean Monnet project, we were awarded with the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. And in that, we had already planned for continuation of discussions on what was proposed during the previous conference. As per the original schedule, we had prepared for Jean Monnet Center of Excellence implementation plan. This conference was supposed to be in 2020 July. So therefore, we announced the call for papers in October 2019. But then the disruption happened, and that made us postpone this event first to November 2020, then to July 2021, and finally now to October 2021. Therefore, I'm only delighted that after close to 2 years of the first call for contributions, the event is taking place, though it's only online. I must thank some of the speakers of this conference who had also contributed to the earlier one and had the patience to wait for this 2 long years before this program was put together. But if you look at the line of speakers, paper presenters, panel discussion participants, it looks worth the wait. For this conference, funded by the European Union under the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence project, we would have ideally liked to have all of you participate, come to Manipal, interact, network, and learn from each other. However, the destiny had different plans and it brought together all of us, though only online. Nevertheless, we wish to keep the spirits high and engage in fruitful discussions on cross-border education in next 2 days. It feels like Manipal Academy of Higher Education, MAHE, is having a Europe week on campus. On October 5th and 6th, we had 2 European scholars speaking on EU's perception of India, organized by the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. Just as we are beginning to have this 2-day India-EU Higher Education Meet, 2 of my colleagues from MCES are joining the 3rd EU-India Experts Workshop organized by the delegation of EU to India under the Think Tank Training Initiative tomorrow evening. There is also a European Language Teachers Meet organized by the Department of Languages and UNIC, EU National Institutes for Culture, which is addressed by the Deputy Head of Delegation, and that's happening tomorrow as well. This shows the breadth of engagement from politics to education to culture and a lot more. This was precisely the objective of establishing the Center for European Studies in India and Contemporary India Study Centers in Europe in 2009 by a call by the delegation of EU to India. Though 3 centers each were established under the IUSCP program by the EU then, the efforts to connect and engage are not that symmetric always. So most of us gathered here, we are aware that the flow of knowledge at this point in time at least is largely from west to east and seldom the other way. At the same time, the flow of knowledge seekers, students and scholars is more from global south to global north. To make sense of this asymmetry, this imbalance, this inequality is the crux of this meet. Just as the title of the conference suggests, idea is to reimagine the border in cross-border education. We are looking at not only the national border, but also some of them which are subtler and stronger, like the systemic, epistemic, cultural, social, philosophical, and of course also the political. With globalization of higher education institutions are juggling to compete with their peers across the globe, at the same time meeting the local aspirations of the people around. This struggle is further enhanced when education makes its way into the realm of international relations, when they are seen as actors within the larger strategic equations that change now and then. All these changes taking place in the educational ecology, the computation, the cooperation, the collaboration, they're all having an impact on the very notion of education, the very philosophy of education. In the next 2 days, let's try and make sense of these changes taking place and deliberate collectively on the ways forward. We have more than 300 registrations for the conference. I'm sure they are joining in one by one now. We also have over 40 scholars from across the world to discuss their ideas on this asymmetry and deliberate on possible solutions, if there are any. I take this opportunity to welcome all the scholars gathered here for this deliberation on behalf of the Chairman Center of Excellence, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. In this inaugural and first session of the conference, we have eminent scholars and leaders in Indian education speaking on policy pointers to cross-border education from different perspectives, national, global, regional, and institutional, thus setting the tone for the conference. It is time I invite our first speaker, Professor Bhushan Patwardhan, and before that, I wish to introduce him briefly for the international audience. As for the Indian scholars, he's a known name already. Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan is an extraordinary scholar and an astute administrator and policymaker. He was the Vice Chancellor of, he was the Vice Chairman of University Grants Commission and Chairman Additional Charge at Indian Council of Social Science Research. He is the Chairman Interdisciplinary Ayush and R&D Task Force on COVID-19, Ministry of Ayush. Over 40 years of experience in research and development in the area of evidence-based Ayurveda, ethnopharmacology, drug discovery and development, and integrative medicine. He is also the Fellow of National Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Medical Sciences. He has also been on the boards of several universities and members of important national committees, important committees of UGC, CSIR, DST, TVET, ICMR, and others. He has worked on committees of NITI, National Knowledge Commission and Planning Commission, and he was invited as a temporary consultant to WHO Geneva. He was the Director, Institute of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine and Vice Chancellor of a Jain University. He has guided 20 PhD students and has 8 Indian patents, 2 US patents, and over 175 research publications with over 10,200 citations. Very happy that Professor Bhushan Patwardhan is here with us. Sir, I invite you now to make your presentation, share your ideas on the policy pointers to higher education in India, and from there we will have other speakers joining in. Over to you, Professor Patwardhan. So you're on mute.
Thank you and namaste to all. Vice Chancellor this great university, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, my dear friend and former Vice Chancellor, Dr. Vinod Bhat, Dr. Neeta, Inamdar, who has really organized this conference very imaginatively. I must compliment all of you at Manipal Center of European Studies for this wonderful conference. And the Indo-EU Interdisciplinary Studies and the association which is involved in this organization of this conference, I must compliment each one of you for this. And thank you for generously giving me opportunity to give the talk and also allotting 30 minutes. I will try to save some time, and maybe if time permits, we can have some interaction as well. I liked your theme, and the reimagining border in borderless education, because we have been talking about borderless education for quite some time, and there are many connotations. I was happy to also read the kind of description you have given in the concept note about what do you mean by border. So I would really like to start with that itself. When we talk about reimagining border, what border we are trying to reimagine, and there are several layers of these borders, and some of the borders are visible because of the new policy pointers which have come through international declarations, including the SDGs, especially SDG 4, the Incheon Declaration 2015, or the UNESCO Education Vision Document 2030, and National Education Policy of Government of India. And because this session also is focused on what is happening in India, my talk will be dealing with more what is happening in India, but obviously I will also expand it to the global vision as well. So we have to reimagine not only these the declarations and various developments which have happened in the past, but also reimagining a border by broadening our own vision is also important. So reimagining the border of purpose, border of attributes, ethos, and pedagogy of education is also important. And reimagining border and going beyond cultural barriers and mental silos, I think, is also important. I'll try to touch upon some of these points in the next 20-25 minutes. I feel that we need a transition, very serious transition in India, from typical teaching to learning, and from education focus, which is kind of a graduate degree programs, to real educatedness. And I will also speak about what do I mean by this educatedness. And lastly, I would dwell upon something regarding reimagining border merely from the human resource development point of view, which is primarily focused on business and economics, which is also important, to borderless education for creating global citizens and essentially for the larger public good. So this is what I think the reimagining border, I would look at it, and I would like to think more on it. I would like to start first with the current scenario. All of us know that we all are going through a very existential crisis, because of this COVID-19. And I'm happy that UNESCO is involved, and the UNESCO document, from disruption to recovery, they have really very well illustrated the problem statement as well as the kind of actions which we need to take on that. So because UNESCO representatives will be dwell upon that more, I will not touch upon that, but I thought that this Global Education Coalition and the high-level ministerial meeting which happened in March 21, these are excellent steps taken by UNESCO. As well as the UNESCO online conference report, what happened during 1 year into COVID, and what are the prioritized items of education to facilitate recovery to avoid the generational catastrophe, was also very, very informative. Now coming to the things what is happening in India. When I see what is happening in India, especially through the National Education Policy 2020, which is very much in discussion right now, I could see that there are a lot of overlaps and resonance happening between these statements, whether it is Incheon Declaration or whether it is UNESCO 2030 vision. If I read the National Education Policy highlight, then it talks about education system that contributes directly to transforming nation sustainability into an equitable and vibrant knowledge society by providing high quality education for all. And you will see that the Incheon Declaration also talked about the same, It talked about ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So this is a good thing that internationally there is a consensus happening in which direction education, and especially higher education, because I will be focusing more on higher education, should go in near future. As far as India is concerned, what NEP 2020, of which some highlights I will, of course, talk about, but I must tell you that this is not something that is happening for the first time. Historically, after independence, the education reforms in India have been talked about. When the Education Commission was established in 1948, and the Secondary Education Commission followed by that, and first report that came out of this in 1964, starting with Dr. D.S. Kothari Commission report, what is known as, and National Policy on Education, the first policy came in 1968. Then very important constitutional amendment happened in Government of India, which is known as 42nd Amendment. And this 42nd constitutional amendment classified education in a concurrent list, meaning state governments and central governments both will have engagement with this education. And this was a major change which happened. Then the National Policy on Education came in 1986. Then it was modified in 1992, and program of action was prepared at that time. And this was followed by several other different kinds of committees in between, including the Tandon Committee or Subramaniam Committee, leading to Dr. Kasturi Rangan Committee, which is now known as National Education Policy 2020. So this transitions why I told you, because if you look at the historical evolution of policy and different pointers that policies have given, you will see that many things are common and many things still remain to be implemented. And as it is said that any policy is as good as it is implemented. So the implementation part was really missing for several years. But let's focus now on what is in front of us. So National Education Policy, or NEP 2020, what it is popularly known as, it has important pillars, and these pillars are in terms of important keywords. And these are equity, access, expansion, inclusion, affordability, accountability, research, innovation, quality, and excellence. These are some of the pillar keywords based on which NEP has been constructed. And the major reforms that or major policy pointers for major reforms which this NEP has discussed or recommended includes holistic, flexible, and multidisciplinary education, which will give multiple entry, multiple exit opportunity, and opportunity to have education anytime, anywhere. And the kind of credit transfer system in terms of academic bank of credit, then the research intensive and teaching intensive university differentiation. They have articulated what different types of universities we can have, teaching universities and research universities, and what could be the model for multidisciplinary education and research university, what is called as MERU, MERU in the policy. Then they have also talked about autonomous degree granting colleges and graded autonomy for those who are new to Indian system. I must tell you that we have taken a legacy after the colonial period was over, and even we are continuing it today, because most of our education system today is based on what was given to us during that time. And so the affiliated college idea, which has stretched to a limit now, that some of the universities, state universities, you will find that they have affiliated colleges and institutions even to the extent of 800 or even 900 in some cases, which is causing a lot of problems. So the policy has addressed this issue in a great detail, and policy is saying that slowly we will have to go away from this affiliation system, phasing out of affiliation system by giving graded autonomy and by giving more empowering colleges to make them degree granting colleges, and subsequently they move up the value chain to become universities of different kind, whether 3 or more colleges can come in and they can form a cluster university kind of a thing. So there are many ideas which have been pointed out in this policy. This policy also has talked about the regulatory reforms. Today in India there are several regulators, and I can imagine when the vice chancellors of the universities have to comply with several requirements of different regulatory agencies, their major time goes in this documentation and compliance. So how to get out of that and how to go into the different kind of a module. When I was at UGC, actually our efforts were in the direction, although UGC is a regulatory body, we thought that UGC should develop or progress in a direction wherein we deregulate the whole process. So self-disclosure based transparent system of approvals rather than inspectors and committees going and visiting campuses. This is maybe needed in some cases, but not in a routine fashion. And let's build a system based on trust and not just on mistrust. So this shift also, you will see some of the glimpses of this shift coming in this national education policy. And then this NEP 2020 also talked about the strengthening research by creating National Research Foundation. And one of the important component of this NEP 2020 is also the theme of this conference, which is internationalization of education. Integration of general, vocational or skill and professional education is another highlight of this NEP 2020. And considering quality at the center and dissolving borders of different kinds, including this is public university, this is private university, this is deemed university. Why these borders? These borders within the university system also, policy has recommended that we should get away and fade all these borders. University is a university, and those who are coming for public or private, if they are delivering quality, we should respect them equally. They also have talked about the financial aspects and autonomy aspects of this, and they have said that the enrollment ratios should be increased. There is no doubt that the enrollment ratio should be increased, but this 50% enrollment ratio which policy talks about, I have expressed my own reservations even while at UGC, because I think that this 50% is not possible unless we strengthen our school system, because unless you have a denominator, it is impossible to go to this kind of a level if you don't have sufficient eligible students to get enrolled in the graduate programs. This goal is very difficult, and some of you may have seen our study report published in Economic and Political Weekly, wherein we have compared 10 different countries regarding GER and how its relevance today to India. I think also because there are UNESCO representatives here, I also wanted to express that in the same paper we have expressed the need to redefine the definition of GER, which was made at one time by the UNESCO itself. It's high time now we'll seriously relook it. In terms of finances, this policy also has given, because everything will require funding, and from where, if you want to have reforms, from where this money will come. So policy has recommended that 6% of the GDP should be spent on education sector, which is a major leap from today, maybe around 2% or less than that to 6%. This is a major recommendation which NEP has talked about. So NEP 2020, I will just talk about internationalization a bit, because this conference is more focusing on that. NEP 2020 is not talking only about internationalization at home. When I say at home, it means that just increasing number of international students studying in India, that should not be the sole objective. Actually, that should happen subsequently, because the quality and affordability of Indian higher education reaches to such a level that it becomes an attractive destination for overseas students. Now, we should also provide greater mobility to students in India who may wish to visit abroad, and study. And for this, we need to create a very good transfer of credit system, which was missing. And I know, talking to even Dr. Vinod Bhat sometime back, students coming from Erasmus Mundus, not only Manipal University, but many other universities also used to find problem where they have spent quality time abroad, they have earned credits, but these credits, there is no mechanism to recognize them in our Indian system. So now with the Academic Bank of Credit, this will be possible. So this internationalization, to put it in proper order, the committee, the policy has also recommended establishment of International Students Office in every university, for facilitating the whole process of foreign students coming or our students going out, and welcoming, supporting students arriving from different countries, because there are differences, cultural differences, environmental differences. Students are coming in new environments, and we really need to take good care of them. So the International Students Office has been recommended for this purpose. Research, teaching, collaborations, and faculty-student exchange programs are happening even today already. How to strengthen them further, how to empower universities to do it in a better fashion. All that has been discussed in the NEP 2020. And high-performing Indian universities, are now will be encouraged to set up their campuses. Now, Manipal already has campus outside India, and where there are few more universities who have campuses outside India. But now this system will be more strengthened and more encouraged. And why one-way traffic? When we are talking about borders, why one-way traffic? Why only Indian universities should be allowed to go out of India and establish their campuses? Outside universities, good universities also should be able to come to India and establish their campuses. So that kind of a regulatory pointer has been very strongly given in the NEP 2020, and the necessary supporting regulatory framework building process is underway. So the credits acquired in foreign universities will be now permitted where appropriate as per the requirements of the respective universities, and they will be counted for the award of degree. So this is a major change that has already happened, because the Academic Bank of Credit regulations have been published 3 or 4 months ago. Means before leaving UGC, I thought of completing some of the tasks which I have undertaken, and ABC, or Academic Bank of Credit, was one of them. And I must tell you that the idea of Academic Bank of Credit, or Academic Credit Bank, at that time we used to talk about, emerged when I was on my sabbatical with Manipal University long back in 2009. So 2009 to 2019, when the recommendations of the Dr. Kasturirangan committee came in, it took 10 years actually from idea to implementation. And 2021, we can now see actual regulations and gazette coming out from the central government for describing the regulations for Academic Bank of Credit. The vision, I think that the vision, broadening the vision, and the border, crossing border regarding vision is also important. And vibrant higher education system grounded in an integrated foundation of modern and indigenous culture. We should empower learners for a better, pragmatic, economic, socio-emotional, and intellectual ethical future for themselves as well as their country, and going beyond for the humanity and for the global good in harmony with sustainable development goals. This should be our broad vision, and it should be embraced. We should embrace technology, cutting edge technology while doing all this. So when I talk about indigenous culture, I mean also on the other side embracing the high-tech technology as well. So this integration of all these ideas in education is not happening as aggressively it should happen at present, and I hope the events like this will facilitate that even more. We need to actually clearly articulate the goals of education, be it primary, secondary, higher education, or undergraduate education, or doctoral education, all this in a seamless fashion. That's what is needed. And we need to translate these goals into definitive curricula, which is today missing, which includes syllabi, teaching, learning materials, classroom pedagogies, assessment, and educational policies. If I talk about elements of education objectives, I would put them in 4 baskets. The first element of education obviously is academic, and this academic objective is about intellectual strength, general knowledge, scientific temper, self-reliance, interdisciplinarity, aptitude, independent thinking, reasoning ability, habit of learning, all these are academic pursuits. The second basket is equally important, which is moral and spiritual values. A student should also be exposed to become emotionally matured. They should understand ethical value systems, simple living principles, selfless service, humility, truthfulness, dignity of labor, high moral character. All these are equally important when we are talking about educatedness. This difference between becoming a graduate, getting a degree, and becoming an educated person. The social responsibility is the third basket I put. National culture and heritage, tolerance for diversity, national integration, understanding rural life, especially in India, the classless, casteless society, political system, economic system, social forces and needs, civic sense, respect for rights, duties and discharge of obligation, high moral character. All these are important as a student becoming educated, irrespective of your branch I'm talking about. You may be a medical graduate, you may be engineer, or you may be a social scientist. These are some of the requisites or elements of education objectives and the fourth important basket is quality, which cuts across all these baskets. So these are the elements of education in my mind, and we have to cross borders, when we talk about current silos, because currently we are trapped in the two binary kind of choices. The first one is intelligence and well-being oriented liberal education, which should be ideal for all of us. But our main focus is now, unfortunately, on economy-oriented formal education, which leads to campus placement-based, salary package-driven education system, which is result of some kind of I would say that the car manufacturing or the assembly line production, that kind of approach we are today using in our education system by giving education just what we want to give them, in a very focused and narrow fashion. Of course, it helps in economic advancement to some extent, but the individual advancements, I think that we compromise in the process. In the process, the liberal education, which prepares actually individual not only for one particular job, but prepares for student to get ready for the second job, third job, and beyond. This is what is extremely important. And I know that Manipal University was one of the first ones talking about liberal education and bringing that in practice. So these are some of the borders we really want to cross. We also want to cross the borders of thinking, or borders of cultural aspects, and the definition which Professor Neeta talked about in the concept note, she has built upon that, by meaning epistemological borders or philosophical borders. In India, I'm talking about, we have to liberate from monocultural dominance. As a country which was under rulers for a variety of, for a large number of decades, we have somehow on our mind the influence of monocultural dominance. But the inspiration for modernity, in my opinion, cannot be imported only from West. Today we think that, and because EU is involved, I wanted to make this point. But inspiration for modernity will have to be derived from the evolving traditions. And the 21st century, dominated by the information knowledge-driven global society or global economy, and the disciplines such as philosophy, history, archaeology, linguistics, fine arts, actually they need not be looked into only from one color glass. And this kind of a liberation from monocultural dominance should be one of the important component of the education system, especially in India and several other countries which have come out of the Commonwealth association. Because in my school, for example, if I see, I have learnt about, I'm a science student, so I've learnt about Galileo, Pluto, Hippocrates, Newton, Archimedes, Darwin, and which is fantastic. We must learn about them, But in India, if we don't learn alongside with that about Panini, about Charaka, Sushruta, Kautilya, Aryabhatta, Varamira, Nagarjuna, Bhaskaracharya, such a great legacy, then we are not really crossing that border of cultural heritage, and that I think is not sufficient, not enough, and not advisable to keep those kinds of borders in our own education. While I'm saying so, I also want to add a caution note that in a process, we should not become dogmatic, me meaning I'm calling me as Indian, or Bharatiya in that sense, we should not become dogmatic and take a stand that we know everything. We must avoid the self-pride and past glory syndrome, and we should be open our minds, and the science or scientific advances connection should not be lost at any cost. At the same time, we should not lose sight of our own culture and our own language. So education in our own language is extremely important, and that's what NEP 2020 has talked about. I am Marathi. I talk Marathi language. My mother tongue is Marathi. Even today, I can tell you, irrespective of my knowledge of English, which is not that good, in any case, but I understand my own mother tongue. Even newspaper, when I read in my own mother tongue, I understand and appreciate it better than reading it in English. But this kind of mother tongue in English or mother tongue education was not very easy earlier, because there was a dominance of English language, and now English you cannot rule out because it has become a global language. But Germans can understand better in Germany, French can understand better in French. So every language has importance, and education in mother tongue is now possible because of the advances in parsing technologies or translation technologies, and building bridges between languages, for knowledge sharing has become extremely important. Now I'm going to go a little fast because I don't want to just go on talking. I would also like to listen from others. But the idea of the university, what we talk about, we consider universities as temples of knowledge where ideas, innovation, and skills are nurtured. Universities are seats of scholarship, statesmanship, and universal brotherhood. And they award academic degrees just as a consequence. That should not be our focus. That giving, otherwise we'll be converting into our degree mills. University should not be reduced to degree factories, and which are more merely focused on jobs and careers. Jobs and career is important, but not at the cost of scholarship. University education must be holistic to inculcate knowledge and skills necessary to shape individual personality, develop mental capacities, and universal values in addition to making career. And I must tell you that these barriers or these borders of created in our mind, in our systems, by differentiating between skills and knowledge should be really fed immediately. Blue collar, white collar differentiation that we make, I think it's absolute, and we must come out of it as soon as possible. Why a degree holder in maybe a BA in English should be treated better or given more glamour than a carpenter who is able to do his job in a very, very efficient and skillful and imaginative manner. I don't see any reason for this kind of a differentiation. I'll come to now just educatedness, what I touched upon during my introductory remark. I thought that I should really talk about it a little more. The attributed of educatedness and educated person, if I want to really imagine, then I would say that independent learning, reading, and communication ability should be one of them first, irrespective of any discipline, engineering, medicine. I'm talking about the basic attributes, then information and understanding that information, because the fake news today has become such a great, if an educated person is not able to really understand what that information is about and whether that information is correct or not, and what kind of an insights he or she should develop from that information, if these skills are not created, that person is not educated. The intellectual capabilities, the critical thinking, inquiry and integration, socio-emotional component, attributes and habits of mind, the responsibilities, and especially understanding the responsibilities of citizenry, these are also important. And last but not the least, appreciation of beauty and aesthetic. If you are a student of engineering also, if that student, or mathematics, if that student is not able to appreciate beauty and aesthetic, I think we have not done a great job, in making that student just graduate, not just educate. We have to also shift our entire pedagogy from teaching to learning, because teaching, the moment I'm a teacher, so teachers have started monopolizing teaching. We as teachers, we think that it is our right to, and only we can teach. This is wrong. Even today, I learn from my students. I think in our current system, we have undermined the intelligence, creativity, capacity, inquisitiveness, and aspirations of students. We don't consider them at all, in the whole process. The teaching is structured, serious, passive, forceful, unidirectional, monologue-driven, and authoritative. As a teacher, I take that authority. No, this is not needed now. We should shift it to learning, and learning is flexible, playful, joyful, active, voluntary, multidirectional, dialogue-driven, and interactive. So the future should be going in this direction, and we should really break all these borders which I just talked about in terms of teaching and learning mechanisms. We must go towards student-centric education system, and NEP 2020 has highlighted this. The multidisciplinary problem-based learning, flipped classrooms, embedded internships. The freedom for students to choose, learn anywhere, anytime. The future education will require entirely different knowledge and skill sets to develop students as global citizens. And we must ask ourselves whether our current system and our current curriculum or syllabus, are we really doing justice for that larger goal? Role of teacher in future may change, and actually it is changing due to automation. The smarter social robots are coming. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybernetics, and robotics are going to change. But I am of the firm view that nobody can replace a teacher. Robots cannot replace teacher. You can replace teacher if you want to use robots to create some kind of a degree mill on an assembly line platform. But for creating and nurturing minds, teachers are not replaceable. So I'm coming just to end of my talk. I think that the blended pedagogy is going to be the future. Education in future will be technology enabled. And while I was at Manipal, and Vinod will remember that we started that TEL program, Technology Enabled Education Program. And a very good platform was created for that purpose. Future education is going to be blended, more flexible, modular, collaborative, cross-institutional, cross-cultural, lifelong, with more emphasis on emotional quotient, cultural quotient, and not merely intelligent quotient. I think our current system is made in such a way that more emphasis is given on the left brain. STEM education has a glamour, but humanities and social sciences are equally important. We should not create new generation with a shrinked right brain. And I know that Manipal has done it already. The emphasis of humanities and social sciences in Manipal, I have seen personally that it is of a very, very extensive extent. While keeping the rigor of engineering, technology, or medical education, they have been able to do that. And many other universities now in India are doing this very, very effectively. So creating more for more creativity, cognitive ability, critical thinking, and bringing passion and compassion, the new education will have to meet needs of industry on one side, or economy on one side, or development on one side. On the other side, it will also create an enabling collaborative convergence between human beings and machines, And because future teachers and robots will have to work together as cobots, and that's what the crossing new border or reimagining the new borders by reimagining new pedagogy will happen. So for the first generation to second generation to third generation to fourth generation, now we are in the fifth generation of education, which is more about educational semantic web consisting of autonomous agents and intelligent database assisting learning systems. And the 21st century skills are going to be entirely different. And we must prepare ourselves to do that. I would end by giving few quotes. The first one I like very much, by Alvin Toffler, which he wrote in Future Shock. The literates of 21st century will not be those who do not know how to read and write, but those who will not know how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. I also remember what Charles Darwin said. I'm a science student, so I remember that. And we know world is changing. Science and technology is changing, ecosystem is changing, economy is changing, society is changing, humanity is changing. How can education remain in isolation? We must change. Otherwise, what Peter Drucker said in 1998, it may come true today. He said in 1998, 30 years from now, the big university campuses will be relics. Universities won't survive. It is as large a change as when we first got to see a printed book. Ladies and gentlemen, this is actually happening. This is no more a scientific fiction, science fiction. It is reality. Education must change. Education must change. The way in which we are delivering education must change. And the theme of this conference actually is in that direction. The theme of the conference, which is talking about reimagining border in cross-border education, actually is telling all of us that it's high time to do that. And I'm sure with illustrious speakers who have lined up, we will get much better and more insights how to move in this direction and how to really get true lessons from different policy pointers for the cross-border education. We may have seen the Indian perspective, but I hope that there will be a resonance you will find when you will think in terms of your own country and your own country's policy pointers there as well. I thank you for inviting me for this India-EU higher education meet, and I wish you all the best. Namaste.
Thank you very much, sir, for providing us all the insights that are derived from the 66-page NEP document and almost demystifying it for those who have not read or have not gone through it. And also, thanks for providing us a very, very balanced view, because when you said inspiration for modernity should come from tradition and it should be from liberation from monocultural dominance. But as well, when you said it is also important not to be dogmatic about and avoid the past glory syndrome. So thank you very much for that very, very balanced approach. Now I invite, we have, and also very important thing that Mr. Padvathan said is about the international consensus when it comes to what education should do. And when he said it is about bringing, it's something that's equitable and inclusive. So when the entire world there is a consensus, why there are still problems? And maybe we hear from the representative from UNESCO for today's meeting, Mr. Manish Joshi. I'll very quickly introduce Mr. Manish Joshi. He is a part of the education team at UNESCO, New Delhi, where he is responsible for technical and vocational education and training, TVET, higher education, and ICT. He has over 13 years of experience in designing and implementing entrepreneurship development and TVET programs at the state and national levels. Manish had served as a deputy head of international collaborations at the National Skill Development Corporation. He's a fellow of the Alexander Humboldt Foundation, Germany, and was awarded the Global Ambassador Scholarship to study public policy in South Korea. So I invite Mr. Joshi to make his presentation, maybe after which, if there are this possibility, we'll take a few questions. Over to you, Mr. Joshi. Meanwhile, I just want to intervention. So if you have, if among 110 participants that we have and some panelists, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A section, which if the time permits, we'll take at the end. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. It was really wonderful listening to all the amazing insights from Professor Patwardhan. And I just wanted to know before I begin how much time I have a short presentation, but then I'm not sure.
12 minutes maybe?
Okay, okay. So I will try and run through quickly in 12 to 15 minutes. I will just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, like I said, of course, thank you for the opportunity. Very excited, and it's a pleasure to be here. Maybe I will change gears a little bit. Of course, we had a very nice and I think some amazing points made by Professor Patwardhan already. And I'll try and bring in a little bit of the international perspective and try and link what UNESCO is doing in its work in higher education, try and link it with recognition and education disruption, and finally, maybe look at a concrete example of a solution that we could perhaps adopt for the most vulnerable, which are actually migrants and displaced populations. So this is the quick run through of the agenda. I will look at, some of us may or may not know, so I will quickly capture what UNESCO is doing in higher education, some of the key activities and initiatives, look at the Global Convention for the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education, which is a recent initiative. It was adopted in 2019 by UNESCO, and how it can support the cause of internationalization. Education disruption, just a quick touching upon, of course, the big disruptor in the recent past and continues to be a disruptor is COVID-19, but also migration and displacement, which has been a disruptive factor for decades and continues to be so. And then look at the qualifications passport, UNESCO qualifications passport, which is one of the tools that finds, of course, a place within the Global Convention and how that can support vulnerable migrants. And I will end with a bit of a future take. I think Professor Patwardhan spoke a lot about what education would be in the future, and also referred to the UNESCO initiative of reimagining education. Of course, UNESCO is the only agency. Some of us may or may not know that when it comes to higher education, UNESCO is really the only UN agency. Now, we know that globalization is putting a lot of pressure both on traditional public institutions as well as private institutions. There are new types of learners who who are joining, those that have requirements different. They may need a different learning environment. They may need a non-formal learning environment. They may have different expectations when they enter the labor market. And I think all of this really pushes national agencies and the governments to respond. Of course, it pushes the private sector to respond. But UNESCO's role is really to support the capacity development. So UNESCO works with governments and really does a couple of things. First, providing and supporting information sharing, which at a global level and at a regional level becomes, it assumes far more importance. Technical assistance, of course, and what we call development of normative instruments, which is very critical, because you spoke about how the global community comes together. And I think it's really important to have these policy instruments that actually push member states, once adopted, to actually try and reflect these normative instruments and try and implement them in their national context. And that's the process which UNESCO supports and facilitates. Some examples, I think all of us are very familiar with the UNESCO Chairs program, and it's been a few decades. This is one of the key initiatives that has been fostering international inter-university cooperation. Another example that fosters networking and brings the community together is the World Conference on Higher Education. This is a quick run through of, I've selected just some of the examples to give you a sense of all that UNESCO does, and then I will try and kind of focus on the most important ones for this particular dialogue today. There is also the World Higher Education Database, which is actually in collaboration with the International Association of Universities. And this, some of you may know, that is actually providing authoritative information on higher education systems. There are over 196 countries, over 20,000 credentials, and information on credentials, but also national education systems and institutions. And with the adoption of the Global Convention, there is also a global WHED ID. And this really facilitates, when institutions are looking to access information, because I will come to recognition later, but this is really not possible without information sharing. Back, I think in 2003 or 2005, UNESCO and OECD collaborated to create guidelines for quality provision in cross-border education. Again, something that is pushing, better quality in higher education and protecting students. And the most recent one really is the Global Convention on the Recognition of Higher Education Qualifications. This is a normative instrument that is aimed at promoting and actually improving the existing international mobility between researchers, between teachers, between, of course, students, and actually providing a legal framework on how students can get their education credentials evaluated in a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory manner. I think this is very critical, and we believe that this is a very important global mechanism to push internationalization and achieve higher quality in education. Also, that, of course, the Global Convention is the binding agreement with the global scope. It's the first of its kind binding agreement, but such conventions have existed in a regional format for a long time. And so the concept itself is not new. Since the 90s, there have been several conventions that started, that were implemented, and then they grew, and more member states joined based on where they were. And I think the turning point was really in 2011, where the revised Tokyo Convention then allowed for any member state to actually ratify and adopt it, which then started to push the idea of why don't we have a global convention that will enable inter-regional mobility. So far, the need for mobility, the need was already global, but I think the mechanisms were still regional. And I think since 2011, then it really became clear, and the work on the Global Convention started. I don't want to go into details of any particular convention. Of course, for India, there is already a relevant Asia-Pacific Convention, which India has not yet ratified. And I think here, of course, we expect that UNESCO is supporting the government and expects that not only the Tokyo Convention, but also the Global Convention, India would adopt and ratify. And what would this do? It would really create a framework for benefit of students. Fair, transparent, non-discriminatory recognition of education qualifications, and even qualifications which are leading to higher education, which we'll see later. And like I said, the novelty really is, this is the first time inter-regional mobility will be opened up. Some of you may also know that, Professor, so, India has been part of this process. It is not that we expect India to adopt and ratify the convention, but the whole process, several years of work that went into defining, discussing, negotiating, what would go into this important global convention. India was very much part of the process. Professor Furkan Kamar, who is now at Jamia Millia Islamia, but was the former Secretary General of AIU, was a part of the process from India. And I think now we really want, and I think the global community is looking at India to adopt the convention. Not to say that, adopting convention is the only way, or the only, it is one of the important ways, or one of the important tools that really can boost recognition. Certainly, it's not the only one. So, like I said, what is it? It's really providing a legal framework. And I think from principles of transparency, from how to do a fair and non-discriminatory recognition, eradication of fraudulent practices, which is very important. And actually, one of the key issues here that I want to highlight is the principle of information sharing, because without while there is adequate flexibility at a national level once the global convention is adopted, it's really important that at a transnational level, there is a dialogue. Countries have designated agencies, the right personnel who are trained to actually conduct the recognition process, but also that they clearly identify how information will be shared, because without this information sharing, no recognition principle or a larger recognition framework can be successful. So I think information sharing, I want to highlight, is a very important part. And then, of course, there are many strategies. Again, UNESCO comes in also to build capacity, to identify and work with national agencies to build their capacity, so that a good number of professionals can be trained and can actually man the information centers, and to actually support the country in dealing with other countries when such requests come in. Also important to highlight, which I will link this later when I talk about the qualifications passport, is that the convention recognizes, also in the spirit of inclusion, which is a very important factor identified already in the discussion, that the respect for diversity is critical. And here the convention actually identifies migrants and displaced populations as a very important group that must be supported. And finally, of course, a mechanism so that any conflicts, any problems in decisions can be appealed. I will not go into detail, but here I think the only important point is that qualifications that are giving access to higher education are also included, not only higher education qualifications themselves. Like I said, the qualifications held by refugees and displaced people, because typically the problem is they don't have enough or adequate evidence to show that they have held these qualifications in the past. We'll come to how that can be solved. Those are all part of this, the mandate of this global convention. And of course, when it comes to partial studies and prior learning, there is a bit more flexibility there. Moving on, changing again gears a little bit to talk about the global perspective, because I want to link the importance of the global convention, the issues with disruption, and then finally the qualifications passport. But it would suffice to say that the last 2 years have been the biggest stress test, if I may, for any education system, or for all education systems across the world. And I think our attempt has been, along with other agencies such as OECD, World Bank, and UNICEF, to really monitor and see exactly what's happening on the ground. And for that, you need evidence. For that, you need data. And one way in which we've been able to capture it is through the survey on national education responses to COVID-19 disruption, school closures. And this is where education ministries and national agencies are reporting on what is happening on the ground, not only how many days schools were closed when they were reopened, but it's just a snapshot, but even going beyond and talking about national strategies in dealing with examinations, in the modalities that have been used to actually counter this. So you would see here that almost all countries have actually used a mix of learning modalities. There is no country that only is going with one. Of course, you can see differences between, if you look at the low versus high income countries, you will see a difference, because that is driven by the availability of bandwidth, the availability of devices. So you will see clearly a difference between which mode or which modality is adopted more. But most countries have responded by also, I think this is a positive development, to put large public systems which are almost free or free in most cases, such as TV, but also supplementing that, not only relying on the online medium, but actually supporting those modalities such as community radio or television with take-home packages, with assignments. So actually a mix. There is no pure online approach that would be successful, as we know. So it's a hybrid approach. And I think UNESCO has always been advocating for a high-tech, low-tech, and a no-tech approach, a combination of all these. And I think it's quite clear that most countries have developed a mix of modalities. But this is just the monitoring part. This is just early days of how remediation is taking place on the ground. But of course, how do we ensure that the practices of countering learning disruption are effective, are inclusive? We already know that if you go one step further into the digital divide that is already existing, we know that it's disproportionately impacting women, it's disproportionately impacting other minorities. And I think there we have to really ensure that inclusion, and one of the things that UNESCO has been championing is really to ensure that inclusion in gender is at the heart of distance learning strategy development. So any strategy must put the most vulnerable at heart. That's critical. Otherwise, we will actually end up increasing the already existing divide. And there are many challenges. So again, this is just a snapshot. This is just to open the discussion. And I'm happy to share this detailed monitoring report on what's happening globally and how countries are coping with the learning disruption. And finally, now moving to how the reopening will take place. Again, we've released and collaborated with other agencies, state agencies, to not only collect evidence, but to share a lot of practical strategies on how the reopening can take place and how teachers have to be supported. World Teachers Day, the International World Teachers Day, has just gone by. And this year, the State of the Education report that we annually release from UNESCO in Delhi actually focused on teachers. So that was the theme. And I think it's critical. And I would echo what Professor Patwardhan said, that there is no way that the recovery can take place if teachers are not at the heart of it. And there is no replacement for teachers. It's clear that the sooner and the better we support our teachers, the easier it would be for us to recover from the COVID pandemic. And I think this is not only teacher training. I think we often talk about social and emotional learning for students, but the social and emotional support that must be provided to teachers is critical, because they have gone through a lot of challenges during this pandemic, least of which is the inability or the the really fast track way in which they had to deal with this disruption and to switch to online modes, to teach classes with hardly any devices and support available, pedagogy, curriculum. And then there are a lot of issues: multilingual curriculum, fit for use content, and resources, online resources. They are all, various countries, including India, we are all, of course, India is doing much better, I have to say, if you look at globally, but these are still being developed. And I think if we have to reach the most vulnerable and the most marginalized, we have to look at all these approaches. We have to look at content not only in English or Hindi. We have to look at really strategies to support the local teachers, those who are in a village school with hardly much available there. So these are challenges that are already there.
Manish, not more.
Sorry.
Can we finish in another 2 minutes, please?
Yeah, I will quickly wrap up. Yeah. Yes. I think linking migration and education is quite simple. We already know that education is the big driver for migration, and migration in turn is impacting education. And again, I looked at the GEM report of 2019, which focused on migration, and it's quite clear that although most countries are trying to include migrants and displaced populations, there are still a lot of barriers. And I will not go into many other barriers, but I would just focus on the lack of documentation, which seems very simple, but within countries, because there are a lot of countries that have internal migration, and between countries, it's critical. If you see what's happening in Afghanistan, I think this assumes special importance because a lot of people are displaced. They go to other countries with hardly any documentary evidence of their past education. And then it becomes very difficult for countries to integrate them in their national education systems and to provide, to ensure. And this has to be done because these are already most vulnerable people. If we don't do this, so the idea is how can some of our tools enable this? And finally, I think recognition of qualifications and prior learning is also very important, because when migrants enter a new country, it is of course the education system, but sometimes initial work opportunities are also important, and they can only be accessible if there is some prior learning recognition which is available. So coming to UNESCO Qualifications Passport, I wanted to link, this is of course well ingrained into the Article 7 of the Global Convention. We know that a very large majority of internationally displaced population is hosted in developing countries. India, for instance, has refugees from Myanmar, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Tibet, list goes on, from many African countries. And what are we talking about? We are talking about a standardized document that actually explains the qualifications a refugee is likely to have had in their home countries based on available evidence, right? And there is essentially a process, a methodology that is a combination of the available documentation, whatever it might be, and the use of a structured interview. So these interviews are done by qualified recognition experts who talk to the refugees and migrants, who make them go through a process of understanding what qualifications they may have had. Now, mind you, this is not a process that can recognize prior learning. So if you have been a carpenter in your country and you've never gotten a qualification, then the process can't assess your skill. But if you have been a tradesmith or even a doctor or a lawyer, but you don't have the document to show, the process can actually give you an interim qualification passport, as we call it, which marks your highest qualifications, any other further qualifications, job experiences, language proficiency, and any advice that the recognition experts may have on further qualification development. And all of this goes into this qualification passport, which can then be used by national agencies, the host countries, to actually give an opportunity to migrants and refugees to become part of the education system, to start again where they left instead of going back. Because one of the common problems, and finally talking about relevance for India, is that when a lot of these refugees come here from Afghanistan, we saw that they have to go back 2 or 3 years, or they have sometimes more, because there is no way to assess what they already have done in their countries. Sometimes they have to repeat 2 years of their higher education qualification, which I think can be avoided. So I think great relevance for India. We are in the process of sensitizing the national stakeholders and working with several ministries, not only the Ministry of Education, but also Ministry of External Affairs, to see how this can be, this tool can be implemented here in India. Finally, last slide is just to talk about the future. The Futures of Education is a very large initiative which is coming to an end this November, which looks at how education must be rethought in these times of uncertainty. And there is an international commission that has been set up, and its report will come out next month. But talking about higher education specifically, one of the UNESCO institutes has done a lot of work, which is to look at what are we looking at higher education in the year 2050. I think there are really 4 points. First, value-driven higher education, where respect, empathy, and equality have to be at the core. Again, something which has come out again and again in global debate, higher education as a public good, which is very important, because with increasing risks and with COVID and with dwindling employment, a lot of people are at risk, which means they are not able to pay and finance their higher education. So can we actually pitch for higher education as a global good? And higher education for all? We have to find innovative ways to finance it. and really drawing on diversity and interculturality. I think there is no way SDGs can be achieved if we are not exposed, if we don't respect other cultures, and we don't create spaces for dialogue, which is very critical. And I think higher education must enable this. And finally, interconnectedness. I think gone are the days when you can only look within. We, of course, have many instruments such as the Global Convention to do this, but we have to find other ways. And if we can do this, then certainly higher education can go to the next level. That's the mission of the Futures of Education initiative. I'll end here, a very quick run through, but hopefully I can take some questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manish, for this presentation. It was very informative and very educative about the normative instruments developed by UNESCO. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. I doubt if we have time for that too, because we're running time here. Now I invite Dr. Vinod Bhat to speak about the regional scope in higher education, because Professor Bhushan spoke about national, and Mr. Joshi spoke about the global scenario, and now I invite Dr. Vinod to speak about the regional higher education regionalism particularly. Just to very quickly introduce Dr. Bhat, he's the Executive Vice President of Manipal Academy of Higher Education right now, but he has led MAHE as its Vice Chancellor previously, and he's somebody with an MD in community medicine, and has had long and illustrious career both as a teacher as well as an able administrator. He has initiated over 25 dual degree programs and innumerable international collaborations that makes MAHE a torchbearer in IHE today. He has also co-edited a book on internationalization of higher education, the dynamics of education ecology, and was instrumental in establishing the Center for European Studies and also in making it the Germany Center of Excellence. He was the co-chair of FICCI Higher Education Committee for the year 2017 and 18, and he has worked tremendously for internationalization of higher education. So here I invite Dr. Bhat to present his ideas on higher education regionalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neeta, for that. Compliment Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan and Mr. Manish Joshi for those refreshing talks. Bhushan especially because it's been, I think we have been in conversation for the last 15 years talking about many of the things that we see in the national education policy. So if there has been somebody who has been working to add certain points of larger public good for the last 15 years, I should mention that Professor Bhushan has been at it right from the day I met him in Bangalore. It was in 2005-06. My talk will be a little different from what Professor Bhushan said or what Manish elaborated. I'll be talking a little bit about regionalism in higher education. In recent years, there's been a steady increase in the emergence of regions and regional organizations involved in the governance of higher education, typically a role meant for national governments. If regionalism was a geopolitical concept, then we can consider successful regionalization experiments as proofs of that concept. Regionalism that I'll be referring to during the course of this talk is in the context of collaboration and alignment in higher education within a defined geographical region. The most known and perhaps most quoted example has been the Bologna process. 29 European education ministers came together and signed the Bologna Declaration in 1999 with a singular purpose of, I quote, creating a European space for higher education in order to enhance the mobility and employability of citizens and to increase the international competitiveness of European higher education, end quote. Now, this definition or the objective of the Bologna process tells you about regionalism. It talks about a defined geography, and that is Europe. It talks about the main actors in this play, the signatory countries. It talks about why they want to do it in adding teeth to their competitiveness in higher education and making Europe as a preferred destination for higher education. That initiative has now grown to 49 countries. These are nations with diverse cultural, political, and academic traditions that have come together, making structural changes in their higher education policies, processes, and systems. There are supporters and detractors of the Bologna process, but both groups of experts are unanimous in their opinion that the sincerity and seriousness of trans-European regionalization is unparalleled. The difference of opinion is in the level of success and impact of such a massive endeavor. If we explore the dynamics and mechanisms of regionalism in higher education, we will stumble upon the fact that there are essentially three fundamental prerequisites that we have to put in place. First is establishing a supranational higher education authority. Second is a common degree structure. The third is the credit transfer mechanisms. Regulations of higher education will have to be regional and not national. A supranational overarching agency will govern, regulate, assure quality, accredit, and promote the purpose for which regionalism was attempted. This also means that the regional agency will fund educational and research initiatives of universities or consortium of universities on a competitive basis in an open and transparent manner, again, which was a national responsibility. So in short, we are talking about a regional agency taking on the roles and responsibilities of several national agencies under one umbrella. The second one that I talked about and the third can be put together, and that is creating a common structure for degrees and the credit transfer can be put together and called harmonization. These structural changes are to be introduced in the entire region and not just one country. The structure that signatory countries to the Bologna process endorsed was the 3+2+3 for undergraduate, the master's program and the PhD program, and the credit transfer mechanism facilitating student mobility was the European Credit Transfer System, or ECTS. We saw these three big changes happening in the first few years of the Bologna process. The EHEA, or the European Higher Education Area, and the agencies for quality assurance and accreditation coming under its umbrella, and the common degree structure and the ECTS. All these 4 or 5 things happen, and I know that many other agencies got under this overarching agency. A few other regions are in the evolving stages at this moment. These include Pan-African higher education and research space, work for which has already begun by setting up the African quality rating mechanism, the network of African quality assurance agencies, etc., and there are several others. The other examples are the ASEAN University Network, the University Mobility in Asia Pacific, a Latin American network, etc. Groupings like ASEAN +6 that include Japan, Korea, China, India, Australia, and New Zealand, are driven by political interests, but hold a lot of promise for higher education. Even a nascent grouping like Quad could evolve into a regional powerhouse of higher education if it is delinked from security and includes a few more countries from the Pacific Rim. There is a compelling case for India to be a part of one such region and to drive the initiative of regionalization of higher education. Several reports in the past have lamented on the mismatch between incoming students and outgoing students into India and out of India. This cannot be solved unless we regionalize higher education and harmonize within the region. To do so, we need to follow the same or similar process as was done before the Bologna process was adopted and the Lisbon Convention was signed. The politics of groupings aside, we as academicians and academic administrators have to push for harmonization. National Education Policy 2020 that Professor Bhushan Patwardhan told in such a good narrative addresses this issue in part. For the first time, there is a mention of a 3+2 or a 4+1 degree structure. And secondly, the choice-based credit system enables student mobility, but does not harmonize the credit system. An ECTS-like tool detailing out what goes into a credit, how many credits into a semester, credits to be earned in a program, permissible credits that can be earned in an away location, mechanisms for understanding the relevance and equivalence of credits, etc., are absolutely essential before rolling out a mobility program. I remember a discussion that happened when Professor Neeta had one of our students who did a semester in Europe and came back. Typically, before sending out a student like this, there is some little bit of due diligence and work that goes into what is the student going to learn and what's the credit that the student is going to come back with. Well, in this case, there was a gray area and that gap was filled only when the student came back, and we were in a dilemma where how do we take this credit? So we developed a mechanism of finding both relevance and equivalence for credits learned outside, and we became that much more smarter. But this is something that every teacher, every institution, every country has to do within a region if there has to be some sense in sending students out or receiving students into the country or the university. Finally, I would want to emphasize the need to reform higher education in the country like never before. This sector in India is overregulated and undergoverned. We have to deregulate higher education entirely and hand over the governance to a regional authority. The €1,000,000 question is, are we ready for it? Thank you for giving me the opportunity to express my views in this workshop. I hope there's something that I can learn as we go towards internationalization and pushing the borders of what we can do as a global university. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhat, for within 10 minutes giving your views on regionalism in higher education. Of course, focusing quite a bit on harmonization and also regionalization, the need for it, for India to participate in these kind of initiatives. There are some panels completely on higher education regionalism or the politics of higher education later tomorrow. And I wish you are also there as we discuss. I'll send, I think you have received the complete detail of the conference, otherwise I'll send it again to you. I wish you're there to discuss it further there. It's time now I invite Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, Vice Chancellor, MAHE. He has contributed significantly in the field of medical education through his various academic positions at Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, from reader to dean. He was also founder faculty of the Department of Medical Education Technology at AFMC. He was in the armed forces for 38 years, during which, besides academics, he has also held numerous administrative appointments and is credited with many, many achievements and successes. I now invite General Venkatesh to share more like an institutional, because already we had somebody speaking national, global, regional, and now we can come to the institutional response to policy changes. Sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neeta. Do I have your permission to share my screen? It's a small presentation. I would be taking around 12 to 15 minutes.
Please, Bhushan.
Is my screen visible?
It's visible. If you could just make it full screen. Yeah, now it's full screen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you once again, Dr. Neeta. Warm greetings to everybody from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, an institution of eminence deemed to be university. At the outset, let me thank the organizers of India-EU Higher Education Meet for choosing such an important topic of reimagining border and cross-border education. And I'll be speaking on cross-border education, approaches, opportunities, challenges, and possible policy interventions. Having heard Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan speaking on predominantly on national education policy and changing paradigms of higher education. We also had Mr. Manish Joshi giving his perspective on international perspective to it. And we had Dr. Vinod Bhat stressing on regionalism in higher education, which is such a successful model, especially in Europe. And now my talk would cover these aspects of cross-border education, quickly recollecting what is cross-border education, internationalization of higher education, a small bit on national education policy specific to internationalization, international outlooks and rankings and the impact of cross-border education, MAHE stated commitment to internationalization and cross-border education, and what are the opportunities of cross-border education, and how do we define local students? That means global education at local cost, which perhaps is one of the important aspects of globalization or internationalization of higher education. Now, when we say, what do we understand by cross-border education? It is the movement of people, knowledge program providers, and curriculum across national or regional jurisdiction borders. It also refers to dual and joint degree programs, branch campuses, virtual education, and online education. It is a division of internationalization of higher education that is linked to the development of cooperation projects, academic exchange programs, and commercial initiatives. Among the many advances in the higher education sector, internationalization has emerged as one of the key drivers of organizational growth. Internationalization, as we understand, is one of the big ideas of the new National Education Policy of India, NEP 2020. And there is a national aspiration that India has to be promoted as a hub of world-class education in pursuit of excellence. And internationalization is a key parameter in the institutional strategy that is pivotal in the World University Ranking Framework, where diversity of international students, the faculty, and internationally co-authored research publications has a direct and indirect impact on the overall ranking outcomes. MAHE's stated commitment to internationalization is to secure global recognition as an internationally reputed organization, facilitating knowledge and cultural exchange, recognizing the diversity and being inclusive, creating a stimulating environment, and enhancing partnerships having a meaningful outcome. With the emergence of cross-border education, there's a significant growth in the mobility of higher education programs and providers through physical and virtual modes of delivery, especially hastened by this unprecedented COVID pandemic. This has created newer avenues for improved access to higher education, strategic partnerships, formation of alliances and consortia, as well as expansion of human resource and institutional capacity. Students in cross-border education are local students, as I mentioned earlier, who seek global education at local cost. Now, the various forms of cross-border education or transnational education may range from initiating twinning program, branch campuses, joint or dual degrees, and online education. In India, as a part of National Education Program, National Education Policy 2020, there has been a very, very significant emphasis has been given to internationalization. Some of the basic aspects of internationalization was touched upon by Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan. High-performing Indian universities will be encouraged to set up campuses in other countries. Those from among the top 100 universities in the world will be facilitated to operate in India. Setting up of branch campuses may have many flavors, which, like program design and delivery, is directed by the provider of the country or the institution. Program design comes from the receiver country, but the program delivery is shared. Program delivery is licensed to the local partner. Program is designed and delivered locally, but validated by an overseas awarding agency. The provider country employs a pure distance learning mode of delivery. These are the various forms of, in which the branch campuses could function. Now, coming to our own experience of Manipal's experiment with cross-border education. Manipal Group is a pioneer in setting up of offshore campuses and developing twinning programs in the country. MAHE's experiment with cross-border education began with the presence of international students in the very first batch of MBBS students in 1953 in Kasturba Medical College. International Center for Applied Sciences was established in 1994. And Manipal College of Medical Sciences in Nepal was established in 1994, and Malaysian operations of Triple MC or Malacca Manipal Medical College began in 1996. Today, the Manipal Group has 11 campuses in 5 countries with more than 45,000 students and more than 1 million alumni. So we were far ahead of our times. Now, coming to the approaches to cross-border educations. Essentially, there are 4 approaches employed in cross-border education. 1, mutual understanding that offers political, cultural, academic, and developmental aid goals. Next is skilled migration that gives stronger emphasis in the recruitment of selected international students. Third, again, a revenue generation that offers higher education services on a full fee basis. Fourth is about capacity building approach that encourages use of foreign post-secondary education as a way of building an emerging country's capacity. So these are 4 of the approaches that can be profitably looked at in cross-border education. Now, cross-border education, when we look at demand and supply, what are the factors that determine the demand for a cross-border education? 1 is attraction of an overseas qualification. Second is an insufficient level appropriate education in a particular country. Flexible mode of study, part-time, fast-track. Emergence of niche programs, top-up qualifications, again drive some of the learners towards cross-border education. On the supply side, we have developments in technology for remote delivery, pressure to generate additional sources of income, a change in academic and organizational culture, and also a desire to pilot new programs or a new modes of delivery. Now, what are the challenges for cross-border education? 1 is striking a very careful balance between quality and access. And second is, with education becoming increasingly globalized, educational products have been regarded as a trade commodity, which is something which is really a concern. Third is need to make financial returns that can compromise academic standards, autonomy, and integrity of programs. Fourth, the other major challenge is due to diverse regulatory environment, domestic providers may fail to recognize the foreign qualifications, which is something which Dr. Manish Joshi brought out. And next is, one of the worries of poor quality program is the proliferation of so-called diploma mills, which is something, again, many of the regulators in the country are taking a serious look at. Another important aspect of internationalization of cross-border education is profiling internationalization and policies. Now, what are the policies of the government and how is the profiling of internationalization developed? Governments around the world are implementing policies to fund study abroad, attract international students, develop innovative collaborative networks, and encourage jointly supervised master's and PhD programs. Profiling of internationalization occurs at national level, at institutional level, at program level, and at interpersonal levels. Therefore, it's a very complex process. And what are the governmental initiatives to promote cross-border education, especially in India? Two of the initiatives of the Indian government that has largely benefited international students and faculty are Study in India program and the Spark program. The objective of Study in India program is to attract international students who will be hosted in India with fee waivers and scholarships. 114 Indian institutions have been identified. Ministry of Education and Ministry of Commerce and Industry offers more than 2,000 scholarships worth USD 3,500 each for the academic year 2021. The objective of Spark is to promote research ecosystem by facilitating student and researcher exchanges between the top 100 universities and top 500 foreign universities in 28 countries. These are the initiatives of the Government of India to promote cross-border education. Looking at the changing landscape of higher education, which so very well brought out by Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan and Dr. Vinod Bhat. How do higher education institutions prepare for changing educational landscape? An increasing percentage of institutions have incorporated global education or other aspects of internationalization into the vision and mission statements of their particular institution or university. Global engagement does have a role to play in the overall institutional strategy by advancing diversity initiatives, enhancing faculty research production, promoting community engagement, and increasing the visibility of the institution. Regarding the stated strategic objectives, institutions should think carefully about internationalization partnerships with regard to, in light of competing priorities and focus areas, realistically assessing the available resources and the extent to which such collaborations are likely to provide desired return on investment. So some of the internationalization strategies that can be used in addition to overall institutional strategy, the university or the HEI must carefully consider how its internationalization strategy fits into the overall efforts. The American Council on Education's model of comprehensive internationalization has identified 6 areas that require careful attention. One is the curriculum and the learning outcomes. Second, articulated institutional commitment. Third is student mobility, which is very critical. Fourth is a collaborative network, both for faculty and for research. Fifth, administrative leadership, structure, and staffing. Sixth, perhaps very, very important, faculty policies and practices which support the home faculty and also international faculty in their own campuses. Perhaps the jumping off point for any higher education institution or the university towards internationalization is to establish an international office that specifically deals with international matters, a curriculum that is infused with global elements. This is, I think, quite critical to producing a globally competent student from hosting university. And third is a faculty policies that encourage international engagement. Now, how does globalization, translation, and using it as a soft power help us? What needs to be done for globalization, translation, and soft power development for a country or an institution is: one, harmonization of higher education to facilitate the movement of students between India and other parts of the world. This is particular to India. A national higher education qualification framework would facilitate recognition of qualifications either way. I think this has been stressed by all three speakers. And this activity is on following the new national education policy. I think the National Higher Education Qualification Framework Committee has been formed and the process has started within the country. And second important thing is that Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan brought out is about the establishment of academic bank of credits. Second, the other important policy decision that the government can make would be to reduce restriction on signing of MOUs with universities, where there will be a considerable increase in the number of collaborations. Recently, there has been a draft policy by UGC which has come out specifying, rather, the proposal to specify certain conditions for, getting into MOUs with various universities with regard to twinning programs, dual degree offerings, joint PhDs, etc. Of course, MAHE has also offered its own comments. We are still awaiting the final, the policy document that will be made public very shortly. The other thing which the governments can do would be to ease the process of recruiting international faculty. And of course, the remuneration to the faculty must be left to the discretion of receiving institutions. There should not be any kind of control over it. And also, efforts should be made, or provision should be made, that seamless transfer of funds secured through international research funding, both for publicly funded universities and privately funded universities, without any distinction. And something for establish India as a soft power. Government may think about establishing India study centers, India-specific study centers, example, study centers on Gandhian studies or Tagore studies in the universities abroad. So in conclusions, the two goals of cross-border education are to enhance quality of education available to students and to stimulate innovation in research to solve global problems and global dilemmas. Both of these call for high degree of integration between universities in different countries across 4 key areas of student mobility, researcher mobility, provider mobility, and now in this current world, virtual mobility. To conclude, cross-border education is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity for any higher education institution. It can add value to HEIs and is a strong component of their sustainability strategy. As has been mentioned by other speakers, technology is a certain enabler of fluid exchange of skills and knowledge. As a policy intervention, cross-border education, from an Indian perspective, must insist on fair trade in knowledge services and reasonable return. Countries must be allowed to be the sole authorities to regulate their own higher education systems. Global forums such as UNESCO, OECD must, in fair terms and with fair measures, facilitate the quality assurance and equal and mutual benefits of the countries in cross-border knowledge transmission. Given the fact that the recent advancements in setting out guidelines for cross-border higher education in India, I'm sure we can expect better and a more transparent transnational knowledge transmission. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, General Venkatesh, for this very elaborate institutional response to policy changes for cross-border education. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions for this session, and we are already something that it was supposed to close at 2:30, it's 2:50 already, and therefore we will have to make room for the next panel, which is session 261, Probing Positionality, Changing Patterns in Knowledge Flows. So I invite the session in charge for the second session. Meanwhile, I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, Professor Bhushan Patwardhan, Professor Vinod Bhat, Professor Dr. N.T. Venkatesh, and Mr. Manish Joshi for taking the time out to be with us for this conference and for this inaugural session. Thank you very much. Over to the next session. The session in charge.
Thank you.
Thank you.